These are the stories I hear every day when I'm going into different places, whether it's the first time I'm there or could be, several times after I meet these folks. It's the same challenges. If we haven't implemented ONE TRAY or EZ-TRAX yet, they still might be facing those challenges.
Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing an industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal to help you fight dirty. Every instrument, every time. Whether you're tuning in for education or inspiration, we're glad you did. Now, turn on those washers and turn up the volume. It's time to go beyond clean.
On this vendor spotlight, we speak with Roger Fries, SPD Clinical Manager at OrthoIndy in Indianapolis, Ryan Pistone, former orthopedic representative at Zimmer Biomet, and Rick Martz, sales representative of ONE TRAY and EZ-TRAX at 3T Medical. And this interview came about as a result of a Becker's editorial that was highlighting the three perspectives that Ryan and Roger and Rick bring to the table in their various experiences with ONE TRAY and EZ-TRAX. So we're going to go a little bit deeper into the conversation from the SPD manager's perspective, the orthopedic representative's perspective, and then we're going to highlight implementation and the benefits of ONE TRAY and EZ-TRAX from the sales representative's perspective as well. We're going to be right back after a short break, so stay with us.
From 17 studios, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
Today, we are speaking with Roger Fries, SPD Clinical Manager at OrthoIndy in Indianapolis, Ryan Pistone, former orthopedic representative at Zimmer Biomet, and Rick Martz, sales representative of ONE TRAY and EZ-TRAX at 3T Medical. And this is really running parallel to an editorial that was featured in Becker's and really taking three different perspectives from SPD, Ortho Rep, and then the ONE TRAY Rep, showcasing issues and solutions from these various perspectives. The article was phenomenal, gentlemen. I just want to commend you. I thought really interesting dialogue and a great take by getting multiple different perspectives, because truthfully, there really are three in this relationship with any hospital that's utilizing ONE TRAY. So I want to welcome Roger and Ryan to the podcast. Roger, you first. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yes, Justin. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And Ryan, you as well. Thanks for joining us for the conversation today.
Thank you, Justin, for letting me come on today.
And so, Rick, I waited to introduce you because we're going to start with you. Tell us a little bit about ONE TRAY and EZ-TRAX. I can say that we've done a number of interviews and really content production and conferences, et cetera, on Beyond Clean. I'd be really surprised if anyone in our audience wasn't familiar with these products, but they might even be a little less or so on EZ-TRAX, which I think is a phenomenal solution. And I actually sat down in our Beyond the Tour episode and walked through that solution. So if nobody's caught Beyond the Tour, I want to point them in that direction as well. But Rick, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your background and obviously ONE TRAY and EZ-TRAX too.
Yeah, so once again, thanks, Justin, for having us. So I'm Rick. I'm one of the sales representatives at 3T Medical, and I've had the privilege to have both ONE TRAY and EZ-TRAX in my bag for the last 4 or so years. I guess EZ-TRAX maybe a little bit less when it came out. And I've been in the medical device field for just over probably 8-9 years now. And these two products are great to go out and have conversations, specifically in SPD as well as the OR. With ONE TRAY, really being a one-of-a-kind packaging system to help out SPDs and increase efficiency when it comes to turnover time, with the ability to have the same standard of care as any other packaging system when you're sterilizing, but eliminating the cooling and drying time, which is, based on maintaining the sterility. So with ONE TRAY and helping specifically with turnover time and crazier days in the OR and SPD, it's a great product to bring to facilities, whether they're an ambulatory surgery center or a hospital. And then adding EZ-TRAX and just being able to help specifically in the total joint area when it comes to those types of procedures and what they're currently challenged with now with the amount of sets that are required for those procedures. Usually it's around 6 to 8 sets. We're able to use EZ-TRAX to just reorganize those trays and reduce that up to, around 50% of the trays less. And so as we talked about with turnover times and throughput and efficiency in SPD, eliminating 3 to 4 trays for a procedure can really help. And I'm sure Roger will touch on that as he goes through when it comes to the total joint procedures.
Yeah, that's a great point. Turnaround time and the volume of trays are the two biggest indicators, for how much throughput is going to be able to go through sterile processing. So Roger, Rick teed you up really nicely there. He kind of said, you're going to speak to this. And obviously from the SPD perspective, I'd like to hear about some of your day-to-day challenges that you were facing prior to bringing these solutions on board at your facilities, and ones that, commonly the industry is facing even at just a higher level when it comes to reprocessing the orthopedic trays.
Yeah, so to begin with, one thing that is getting more and more common in healthcare in general is less staffing. All facilities want you to do more with less. And with orthopedic surgeries, I think the thing we have to realize is you can't really take shortcuts with vendor trays because what they need is what they need. So you'll have some surgical cases where they might need 25 trays and they may only open 10, right? But with orthopedic total joint trays, a lot of the stuff the vendor is bringing in is stuff that is truly needed for that case. So at my facility and at other facilities in general, the consensus is, how are we going to be able to get this work done without adding FTEs? Since COVID has been going on, you can't add FTEs even if you have the open FTEs to add anyways, just because healthcare is so dry right now in the ability to hire people. So what really got us into EZ-TRAX was the fact that we had a wrapper shortage. And I don't know if a lot of other people in sterile processing are aware, but about a year ago, almost a year and a half ago now, there was a nationwide wrapper shortage depending on who your vendor was for your sterilization wraps. So we were faced with challenges of how to continue surgical procedures without getting any inventory of our surgical wrappers in. So I was faced with a situation to decide, am I going to cancel cases or am I going to find another system that works so we can continue to process instrument trays in general, but then also all the total joint vendor pans that we use at our facility. So that's kind of the challenges we faced early on. The short staffing situations, the wrapper shortages. And that's really what pushed me toward EZ-TRAX. Complete transparency, I took over at OrthoIndy almost 3 years ago now. And when I first took over at OrthoIndy, I heard the spiel on EZ-TRAX and how it could help our facility. And at the time I said, nah, I don't see it. And honestly, that was because I didn't know what it could do. I hope during this podcast, we can really elaborate on what it can do. And I can really speak to how it's really helped my facility where I'm at now. And that will show others out there that it truly can make a difference in not only your throughput in SPD, but your OR turnover time and the amount of total joint procedures you can actually get done in a day.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that real quick and kind of, with Roger said, maybe at first it's not for him or that time that it was presented to him, maybe it wasn't for him. It just getting it in the back of his mind, and you never know with that center or that hospital may become a specific to just doing orthopedic total knee and total hips. And so they're going to get bombarded with a bunch of new sets, new vendors, and they may think about when they had that conversation with the sales representative back then, which maybe is what happened with Roger as they got busier or back to their normal flow of cases, during COVID.
Yeah, and that workforce shortage isn't going anywhere. I mean, that's here to stay, and we're going to have to look at technologies and solutions that drive efficiency because we're not just going to be throwing bodies at it. And, honestly, when you talk about those challenges that you faced, Roger, I'm sure, Ryan, from your perspective, working as an orthopedic rep, that those were shared challenges and shared frustrations. Like you could show up and be ready for a case, and if they didn't have the supplies, to sterilize your sets to get them up to the surgeon gets frustrated. Like it really causes a lot of havoc. And so why don't you tell us a little bit more about your experience, similar to Roger's, but from the representative side, and your just general relationship with SPD technicians and managers trying to work through all that.
Yeah. So, I came from the unique perspective of, I was a rep, right? I was probably not Roger's favorite person. I didn't work with Roger specifically, but ortho reps aren't always everybody's favorite because when we show up with 50 trays for, let's say 7 procedures, not everyone's going to love us. It was a rocky relationship with most SPD. And I think most ortho reps, right, at least the good ones out there, we always try to do everything we can to reduce the burden on SPD because it is not a fun thing. You could see the sadness on everyone's face when you show up 1 or 2 days before a case and you drop off a bunch of loaner trays and everybody just looks very sad, right, in SPD. And then to kind of add to it, it's the same thing, that Roger mentioned about cutting down opening time and turnover time in the OR. It's the same thing. I've never met a tech in my life, a scrub tech in my life up in the OR who's happy to grab 7 or 8 20 to 25 pound ortho trays, right? We're their least favorite person, right? Understandably, because from their point of view, we're adding to their work. When I was a rep, personally, we in our territory kind of looked at this and we saw it as a way before EZ-TRAX was a thing to try to reduce trays as much as possible because we knew that this was going to be a benefit, right? And the way that we were able to do that, or the way we solved it, was what we're going to talk about a little bit later of selecting certain instruments, right? But we recognized that there was always a problem. The issue was that the only solution until EZ-TRAX came along was something that I'm obviously this is a podcast. People can't see Roger's face, but Roger's probably going to laugh when I say this of just pour a bunch of stuff into a pan. Hey, Roger, I cut my 7 trays into 2. Here you go. And it's just in a pan, right? That's not a solution, but that was the solution before EZ-TRAX came along, right? There was no good way to do it. And the frustrating part for me as a rep, right, was I felt bad for, I've never met an ortho rep that didn't honestly feel bad for SPD, right? Now, maybe that might be my experience, right? Roger's smirking at me. I'm sure there's other experiences out there, but I know a lot of the people that I worked with, right? They felt horrible, right? But there was very little we could do because it was controlled by our parent companies, right? They give us trays. We have to take these trays, drop them off at at SPD. And it was until now, there was a lot that was outside of our control, right? But EZ-TRAX gives reps, hospitals, and gives reps and hospitals an opportunity, or SPD departments, right, an opportunity to reduce trays in a very safe way that still protects the patient, right? They get what they need, but it also makes the surgeon happy, right? It makes SPD happy, and it makes the OR happy. It's a tool that makes everyone happy, right? So that's my long answer.
So it's just interesting to me because you're saying like the parent company gave you the sets and the instruments and you just bring them in. And then it's kind of the same thing for Roger's position, which is the facility schedules the surgeries and gives him the surgeries, and ultimately he gets the sets. And the whole goal is to allow the surgeon to do the surgery as efficiently and quickly and as safely as possible. And yet somehow SPD and the ortho rep both know that something could be a lot better. And so, Rick, I'm sure that you've heard these stories before, and maybe you could talk about how ONE TRAY and EZ-TRAX really brought this unique solution to solve a challenge that really was just getting unaddressed.
Yeah, I mean, these are the stories I hear every day when I'm going into different places, whether it's the first time I'm there or could be, several times after I meet these folks. It's the same challenges. If we haven't implemented ONE TRAY or EZ-TRAX yet, they still might be facing those challenges. And, with the combination of using ONE TRAY, right, that's going to help them on just any day that there's kind of multiple cases in a row of using the same types of instrumentation, rapid turnover type of needs. And so that is great for any type of procedure, right? And doing it during an ortho day just adds just the benefit to that day, because usually they're doing, and Ryan can attest to this, Roger can attest to it, multiple knee or hips in a day. You're hoping that the vendor can bring a sufficient amount of instrumentation for those cases, or you have some consignment sets, some loaner sets, maybe some surgeon special sets, and there might not be enough of those surgeon special sets. So having those and having ONE TRAY can really help in those type of days. And just, EZ-TRAX, just like having it a little bit more organized, right? Instead of just thrown in a basket or thrown in a rigid container, there's the chance of an instrument getting broken. There's a chance of an instrument getting lost during that. And then I'm sure the ortho rep and the hospital are going to look at each other and say, who's responsible for this, right? EZ-TRAX definitely gives it a little bit better of, actually a lot better organizational when it comes to reducing those trays, keeping things separate the correct way, having little pockets and different caddies for trials. And so, yeah, the combination of those can definitely help from an efficiency standpoint, as I mentioned. I think a safetiness for the patient, as well as just overall satisfaction from a rep standpoint of lugging all those trays in and out of an OR room, as well as the staff. And then just from Roger's perspective of washing, prep and pack, and sterilizing and storing, cutting 50% of those trays down can really help.
Less trays also means quicker turnover in the room. So if anybody's listening from the, perioperative audience, there's a benefit there as well. Roger, you said initially you weren't a believer, right? You're like, I don't think so. But listening to everything that Rick said, I'm assuming that you saw a similar impact, at your facility, kind of meeting the challenges that you outlined, earlier in the interview. So, like, how big was the impact once you had both solutions in place? And are you using it, across the board at your facility or in just certain situations? What's the application?
Yeah, so I'll start by saying I'm a numbers guy. And so everything I do in sterile processing, I have to see the numbers. And I'll go out on a limb and say I don't do it because I think at the end of the day, there's going to be some monetary value put back in my pocket for saving a certain amount of money throughout the year, because there's not. But for me, if I'm going to invest in a product or use a product, I do have to see the return on investment. So when I first listened to EZ-TRAX, it was not necessarily the fact that it didn't make sense to me or I didn't think I could apply it to what we do, but I had to sit down and do the return on investment for my end of things to see, hey, yes, we're going to have to pay for these trays, but let me also see how much time we can save in turnover time and how many more trays we can get done by the techs and SPD and how many more items can we sterilize at one time because we have less pans, and how many less loads during the day are we doing through our washers because we don't have as many trays. So it was a situation of me really just sitting down as the manager and the leader in sterile processing for my organization and saying, I need to see the money on paper to make it make sense. And honestly, I will say it was like night and day difference when you really sit there and do the math. Now, if you're not one that wants to take, a couple weeks to sit there and really do the math and get the correct number, yeah, you can look at it and be like, oh, well, one tray costs, $1,100 and I'm going to order, 15 of them. I don't think we have $17,000 in our budget. Then yeah, you're going to get hung up on it if you just look at the financial aspect of what the trays cost. For me, it was truly sitting down and doing the math to say, well, not only are we saving in these 4 categories, but now we're also handling this many less trays. So my staff's handling trays less at least 3 times because you have putting them in the washer, you have assembling them, and then you have loading them into the sterilizer and putting them away. So that's 3 to 4 times minimum. They're not handling extra trays. And then you have to think about it from an OR perspective. If I'm opening a tray and it has a hole in it, and I'm opening a wrapper, it has a hole in it, well, now I can't use that tray. If I'm opening a tray and it's wet because the wrapper's wet, I can't use that tray. I have 12 trays to open for my total joint procedure, or 10 trays to open for my total joint procedure. It's going to take me 45 minutes to open since I have to check all the towels, all the wrappers, make sure there's no holes, no condensation, anything like that. Then on the back side of things, when the procedure's done, someone still has to account for all those trays. And as much as I would love to say my orthopedic reps stay in the room till the last second and put every last tray back together how it's supposed to go and make sure all their instruments are there, I would be lying to everyone if I said that. Everyone who's probably listening knows that that's not exactly true. Most of the time, the surgical tech in the room is the one who gets the responsibility for that. So on their end, to only have to go back through 3 or 4 EZ-TRAX trays, to know that they only have to put 3 or 4 EZ-TRAX trays back into the case car, or for my facility, we do not have an elevator. We have a dumbwaiter, so they have to load every individual instrument set onto a dumbwaiter and send it down to SPD. That's time. I think last time I checked, it was $62 for 1 OR minute. So, I mean, if you're saving 10 minutes per case and you're doing 6 cases in a day, well, now you're doing an extra total joint case during the day, and you're covering the price of the OR for that extra case you're doing. So there's a lot of different things that you have to look into from a workload standpoint, from a budgetary standpoint, and things like that. But to finish the question, for my facility, we used ONE trays when I first got there, but we were using them for everything. As in anything that we needed to turn over for a later case, we just threw it in a ONE tray. And what we were finding out was, I mean, we were doing 400 ONE tray loads a month up in the OR autoclaves. What I decided to do is I really wanted to leverage what we did with the ONE trays. I think ONE trays are a great source, but I think you should still use them correctly in a way that makes sense for your organization. Every organization is different. Every hospital is different. You know, if you're doing eye cases or things like that and you're doing 15-minute cases, yeah, that's probably good to put everything back into a ONE tray up in the OR. For us, though, it was leveraging my staff to turn over what they could in the sterilizers downstairs so we could keep the ONE trays freed up for EZ-TRAX and bigger ticket items that we knew we could not get turned over in time for the next case. So what I did when I first got on board with EZ-TRAX was I went to my senior leadership at the time and I said, look, we're having a wrapper shortage. I'm having a staffing shortage. We're going to continue doing cases, but here's what I need to continue doing cases. And I'll say the first time senior leadership saw the paper in my hand, they put their head down. They looked at it and they were like,
that's pretty common, Roger, though, right? Like, especially during tough times, you know, and I like how you approach that by making the business case. Look, you're going to get this ROI. How quickly, do you have an idea in your mind of how quickly you got the ROI after you showed them this ticket and then they kind of got on board? You know, how many weeks before you'd recouped that and then begun to reap the benefits of increased profitability from the savings?
Yeah, so it didn't take them long to get on board. I'll be completely honest. It took a conversation and then me being quiet for a little bit and then going back and saying, but this is what we really need. And I will say they were very open to it at that time. As far as return on investment, knowing what we spent up front, but also knowing we did not cancel a single surgical case, as well as now we are doing more work with less staff, which is ultimately what healthcare is right now. I would say realistically, 6-7 months, we had on our return on investment, maybe a little sooner. And I just say that from a standpoint of making the reps come get the trays organized, the EZ-TRAX trays organized, because, you know, there's essentially condensing their stuff. So that does take a little time. The ONE tray reps who I partner with, partnering with the reps to make sure that they are condensing that. And then just getting my staff in the OR used to seeing that. It does take buy-in and it did take a little time. But to me, 6 months for a return on investment that now is in a sense, free money because you're not using a wrapper every time you're using trays you've already purchased, you've already paid off, is very good when some of those trays can last you 3, 4, 5, 6 years. So we're in the green currently, at least. That's how I feel as far as comparing wrappers to EZ-TRAX and comparing the amount of work we were doing before EZ-TRAX to the amount of work we're doing now. And I think also at the end of the day, it was staff satisfaction too, though. And I think you have to, in today's world where healthcare is, you have to take that into account too. If the SPD staff is not happy, if the reps aren't happy, if the OR staff's not happy, it doesn't matter how successful the surgery goes, you still have unhappy staff. And so implementing the EZ-TRAX, not only did it give my staff less work in a sense, but it also alleviated a lot of pain points for the scrub techs in the OR to where they sat in meetings afterwards, in staff meetings, and I've heard them say things like, oh yeah, now we can do a total joint and we're only opening 3 vendor trays. And we were opening 6 or 7 before, 8, 9, 10. And it's making our life a lot easier. So when myself and leadership can sit in a meeting and we can hear those things, you truly know that it made the difference that you wanted it to make.
Yeah. And, we're going to talk about implementation too in a second. And you kind of alluded to that, how that was going to take over 6 months, but that's a phenomenal ROI period, especially when you're removing a per procedure cost from that calculation from that point on. Ryan, from your perspective, how would this technology have helped you? You'd outlined some of your frustrations. Roger and Rick both kind of touched upon it, but, how would it have helped you? And do you get feedback now from the operating room or other reps in the industry who are utilizing ONE TRAY and EZ-TRAX?
Yeah, so I would say, what would have been the benefit to me? Exactly kind of what Roger touched on at the end there of making people happy, right? Because it would be selfish for me to go like, oh yeah, we did more cases, right? The realistic fact is that my job is a lot easier when I was a rep, when everybody was happy, right? So implementing a system that makes everybody happy makes my life easier, right? So that's the benefit to me. We did do, when I was actively a rep, we did do things to cut down on trays. It was not to the degree of what we would have been able to do with an EZ-TRAX, but even that like tiny impact of cutting out 25% of the trays, right, made the world a difference. It made everybody happier, right? There are so many benefits to it that directly touch SPD in the OR, that Roger kind of hit on, that you never even think about it. Oh, we can actually wash trays in a single load instead of 2 loads, right? Well, that has a cascade effect. So, the real benefit to me when we did this and the kind of feedback that I got when I did this in an abbreviated manner was that everyone was happier. And I do know, speaking with, my former colleagues and my friends who are reps today, they love ONE TRAY, right? Because as a rep, no one likes calling their significant other and going, hey, I'm going to have to stay late. Our cases got delayed. And then from a rep perspective, like Roger said, if you could do an extra case a day, that makes everybody happy, right? And a lot of places, like Roger mentioned, are doing it no matter what, right? They went to Roger and they probably said, hey, we're doing 10 cases a day. Figure it out, right? And Roger then had to go and figure it out, right? And the same thing goes for the reps. They go, hey, we're going to do 10 cases a day. You need to get us more trays. Right. And that's not always the case. We can't always get them more trays.
And in some cases, you have to, just because of the state of healthcare financially right now. They really can't afford to, not to mention the patient population is really backed up, especially on anything that was considered somewhat elective. Getting in for those cases and that volume and most hospitals were thankful to get back to normal. But the problem is that backlog doesn't get you caught up. And so the consumer is sitting there and waiting. So we can't just get back to normal. We have to get back to above normal to meet the patient demand as a result of the cancellation of those procedures. And so, we got a few minutes left, and I really want to focus on the implementation piece because, Roger, you talked about sort of the assessment. You said, I need to see an ROI before I'm going to move forward with something. But there's going to be people out there that are going to be like, okay, I heard a lot of things I really like. I understand the challenges. I think this could help me. And then they're going to think, but how much work am I going to have to put in to be able to bring this product into my facility. And a lot of times that's actually the obstacle. You can get through the financial discussion and everything else, but it's just due to that manpower piece. If this is a heavy lift for me and my team, I'm not going to be able to do it. And so I really want to walk through that because I know there's a lot of support that's offered in this model. And we're going to start with you, Rick, specifically around, how do you identify the needs that a facility might have? And then how do you navigate this process of bringing EZ-TRAX in?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I'm approaching a new facility or if they've reached out with interest, I really just try to learn as much as I can about their, weekly or day-to-day type of schedule when it comes to particular days for particular procedures or how many ORs they have, right? What does SPD look like? How many autoclaves do they have? How many washers do they have? Usually as we talk about these things and present the challenges that other facilities face that we talked about earlier in the podcast, we kind of find where initially One Tray can help. And usually it's on that crazier day that there's multiple procedures back to back to back, where sometimes they don't have enough instrumentation and you have a doctor or a physician, right, sitting in the break room twiddling their thumbs, and that is costing money. And so if we can help with those days, keeping cases rolling, keeping cases going and turning over, in a much more efficient way than maybe what they were doing, and keeping that doctor in the OR and getting everybody out on time, right? That's a big thing that I always like to try to address first, right? When are those days? What are those instrument sets or implant sets that are causing that to happen? And then the process of implementing EZ-TRAX, it is a big time team effort, as Roger kind of alluded to, with all the people involved. It usually starts in SPD. My initial conversation is with either a manager in SPD or maybe just the tech that always is with the ortho sets. Then we kind of take the idea to, usually it's somebody in the OR then, right? Whether it's an ortho coordinator or an ortho tech that is, again, always in those types of cases. And this is, again, what has been working for me in my area and the types of facilities I go to. And then, as we kind of work together, we find out, all right, what's the vendor of choice that you would want to start this with? And then they kind of give me that name. I develop a relationship with that rep. And then it's kind of like, all right, well, let me work with, the rep. We're going to build out one of their total knee sets and then let's all come back together and check it out. Right. And, having both SPD tech, ortho tech, rep, myself, usually that's like the good 4 to kind of start, build the sets. We look at it. All right, this can work, right? Sometimes the surgeon has to be involved, right? Because they want to know what's going on with their sets sometimes. So like I said, it's a big time team effort, and getting people comfortable does take time, right?
And there's going to be less instruments. So, you've got the surgical staff that's getting weird about, well, what about my what if happens instrument that I need or whatever. Like, I'm a nurse and I know how we kind of stockpile that stuff in case of emergency, break the lock on the extra tray, like that's how that plays out. And so I'm assuming that there's a consultative kind of approach to that, what you're describing, but it's not just one person. It's not like, I got the surgeon to get it, but now you have the surgical staff. And then obviously you said you're starting with SPD, approaching a vendor representative that, is going to be supporting the cases. But that's really critical, I got to think, to just make sure that they understand what happens in the event of an emergency. Like, this is the contingency plan. This is how we get you working more efficiently. And I don't know, maybe Ryan, you can even add to this, kind of as the rep, do you have to be involved? Like, let's say Rick comes to you and says, hey, I want to get involved with this, but helping the surgical staff, surgical techs and the nurses and the surgeon to all be comfortable. Do you have to kind of come alongside Rick to make sure that they also know that you're on board and how to make sure they'll be taken care of in the event of, some sort of a nuance during a procedure?
Absolutely. If you tried to touch my trays when I was a rep, right? If I didn't know Rick and Rick called me out of the blue and said, hey, I'm going to reduce your trays by 50%, I probably would have hung up on him. And the fun part for Rick is Rick's a spine rep, and he would feel the same way today if somebody went and did that to him. So I think he probably approaches it from the perspective of like, I won't touch your stuff, right? But absolutely, right? Because for a rep, trays are our life, right? That if you take away our trays or you mess with our trays or you ruin our trays, you potentially, we will take it as like you're hurting my baby. Because that's how we live, right? So having a rep involved in the process and kind of being empathetic towards them is super important, right? Because you have to make it feel like it's their idea, right? You might even suggest like, oh no, I think I heard you mention this before, right? Like it has to be their idea. And then there are always, contingency plans, right? I always call it's an emergency tray, right? We know that we're going to reduce your stuff, but we know, there's always a backup tray. And there's always a backup tray, right? When I did total hips and total knees for 6 years, we always had backup trays, right? It's just the backup trays are always going to stay the backup trays. It's just let's really target those trays that you're pulling 3 instruments out of, right? If there's a tray, there's 25 instruments in it, and you're pulling out 3 instruments, that's a waste of a tray. And I think that's kind of what Rick works with, with the reps and the scrub techs and everybody and go, let's eliminate the waste here.
Roger, what would you add to that, or would you add anything? And especially on the implementation side, I'm certain that, as you were kind of working with all the different stakeholders that you may have, run into, different situations in servicing. So maybe you could add to that.
Yeah. So the biggest thing that I would add is leverage your reps to do majority of the work with the ONE TRAY vendors. And what I mean by that is if they're condensing from 10 trays down to 4 or from 8 trays down to 3, you don't necessarily need to know what, as a SPD personnel leader, whoever you are, you don't need to know what's being taken out. At the end of the day, that's your rep's responsibility, who works with the surgeon every day, all day, to understand what the surgeon uses and what the surgeon doesn't use. I mean, I have 40 surgeons in the network I'm in, and they do all different kinds of cases. So if I had to know every last instrument that they used at all times, I mean, it would be impossible to know. So what I did in implementation was I got out of it. I partnered the ONE TRAY rep and the orthopedic company rep together. And I said, hey, you guys put the trays together, design them how you want them, put in what you want, whatever can be pulled out. And then I'll come back at the end. And if I like the damage that was done, then I'll say, yeah, that makes sense to me. If I come back and you only saved me 2 pans, so you went from 10 to 8, well, we're going to have another conversation, because that's when I will step in and say, wait a minute. That's not enough savings for what we're trying to do. That's not going to be a good return on investment. What more can you do? I will say I was very fortunate. Ortho reps at my facility really embraced it. I mean, they didn't look at it as punishment. They didn't look at it as anything negative on their end. They really looked at it as, hey, we understand what you're trying to do. We're going to work with you to make sure it's done correctly. And honestly, at my facility, I didn't tell a surgeon anything was happening, because the rep who works with the surgeon all day long probably has a stronger relationship with that individual surgeon than I do as an SPD manager. So I even said, hey, you guys go get dinner. You talk about A, B, C, D, E. It's your job to plant the seed. So, and that went over so smooth. I have multiple ortho surgeons who none of them even honestly knew anything different, except the trays looked different on the outside. That was the only difference, because the reps did such a good job of executing the switch and eliminating the instruments that really weren't being used. It never caused a problem with anything. For my staff, implementation was a little different, because it was getting them to understand, you're going to see these trays, there's going to be more instruments in them. So yes, it may take you, instead of it taking you 7 minutes to clean a tray in Decatam, this tray may take you 9, because we've added a few more pieces to it. But then you're going to get 4 less trays per total joint. So on a day when we're doing 22 total joints, that's 88 less vendor trays you're going to get. And we have days where we do over 260 vendor pans in a day in SPD. So that was the buy-in for them was less work in decatan per tray, but the trade-off was you might have to spend a little longer on some trays. And then it was getting them to understand on the clean side, you don't wrap those trays. They go down in a one tray.
Because they were so used to wrap, right, Roger? Like that was just everything that they were doing leading up to this was just wrap.
Yeah, 100%. And they even hit me with, well, it takes longer to put it in a one tray than it does to wrap. And once again, I look at the whole side of things. So I said, all right, let me see one. And they said, well, it really does. And I said, that's 100% fine. I believe you. I trust you 100%, but I want to see it myself. And what we did find was, I mean, are you talking seconds? Yeah, it might have took you 2 seconds longer to put it in a one tray. Time you put the lid on it, flip the clasps down, and put the locks on it, put the luggage tag through, and carry it over to the sterilizer rack. But what you're also not realizing is you're doing 4 less trays per total knee. So you're actually still saving so much time. If it takes you 5 minutes per tray, you're saving 20 minutes. Yeah, you spent 30 seconds longer on these 3 trays. You still saved 18 and a half minutes on a single total joint. As far as for the OR, the buy-in was pretty simple. The implementation was pretty simple. I went to a staff meeting. I let them know what we were looking to move forward with. I listened to them. They had a lot of questions. I think the first staff meeting I introduced it, I answered 40 minutes of questions. If there's a surgical tech that doesn't ask you questions when you're going to implement a new product or a new instrumentation or equipment, I would question, are they there for the right reasons? So I knew I was going to get hit. I knew I was going to get hit with many questions as I did. But once I explained to them the process and what it was going to look like and how it was going to make their life easier, they were on board. And like I said, they've been on board ever since.
If I can add something to that, by the way, Roger's in a very ortho-heavy world, right? But those looking to do this at hospitals and ASCs, I always do laugh because I think to myself, especially with the tray reduction, they do this in other specialties all the time, right? Hey, why are we opening up 5 urology trays? Oh, we should look at the instruments. We could probably cut that down to 3, and then they cut it down to 3 and everyone's happy. So it's a little new in the ortho world, especially when it comes to the vendor trays, but I always thought to myself, the process is really similar to what you see in other specialties. And again, I know Roger for a fact worked at a hospital before that, so I'm sure he had tray reduction projects all the time. So it's just a different world.
Yeah, real quick, if I can, Justin, the difference is, as Ryan alluded to, is I've worked at multiple hospitals as well. You're not paying a company to come in and do a reduction of trays or instruments for you. So there's companies out there, there's multiple companies out on the market that will come in and you pay them $65,000 and they'll come spend a week at your facility and they'll meet with the surgeons and ask what they use, and then they'll put it all on a spreadsheet and compare and do a analysis and all of that for $65,000 for that week that they're there. As to where on our end of things, or ONE TRAY and EZ-TRAX side of things, you take the rep who's using the stuff, you take the ONE TRAY rep who is marketing the equipment, and you have them work together, and you're not paying $65,000 for that week to reduce instruments and cut out instruments that aren't being used. You're buying the EZ-TRAX trays, which depending on how many you buy is, could be a different cost. But I think that's the biggest difference is every facility, or not every facility, but most hospitals and ASCs do total joints. Most hospitals and ASCs could benefit from this product.
Well, I think you guys did a great job, especially just presenting all the different angles of the conversation, right? So from Rick, we heard about, how to work with the reps and to work with SPD, and as well as the other internal stakeholders. Roger, you talked a lot about the business case and how you evaluated the opportunity. And then Ryan, honestly, Roger kind of puts, the reps in the role of really talking to the surgeons and making things go. And I like that, Roger, that you didn't over micromanage the situation. You leveraged the people on the team that had the right relationships for the project to be successful, but then you had the right level of oversight and insight that you added. So really impressive. I want to thank all 3 of you for coming on the show and telling your story. And I do want to remind everybody who's listening to go check out that Becker's article, because that editorial was excellent. And I'm glad that you came on today to kind of go into a little bit more detail. Sometimes with the editorials, they can only tell, certain focused sections of the conversation, but you all added a lot of color and expanded the conversation out. So thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Justin.
That was Roger Fries, SPD Clinical Manager at OrthoIndy in Indianapolis, Ryan Pistone, former orthopedic representative at Zimmer Biomet, and Rick Martz, Sales Representative of ONE TRAY and EZ-TRAX at 3T Medical. And this was a really cool story from multiple different perspectives, originally highlighted in a Becker's editorial, but we took a deeper dive today to really flesh out the various perspectives that would be involved in the implementation of EZ-TRAX and ONE TRAY, especially working together to drive efficiency by reducing the times for sterilizing the trays, and then also by reducing the number of trays that would be needed for not only orthopedic procedures, but other services as well, as Ryan highlighted there towards the end of the interview. I do want to remind everyone that if you want to reach out to ONE TRAY, you can email them at info@onetray.com. You can call them at 937-619-0138. And as always, follow the ONE TRAY IFU for use. That's going to do it for this vendor spotlight. But as a reminder, you can help support Beyond Clean by subscribing on Apple, Amazon, or Google Podcasts. We're also available on Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or simply search for Beyond Clean on your favorite podcast application. We've also got bonus content for certain episodes, but to access it, you have to download our smartphone app for either iPhone or Android. And while you're there in the marketplace or the App Store, we'd certainly appreciate a rating and a review because your feedback is important to the show. And if you have any questions that you'd like us to cover on a future episode, or maybe you've got a recommendation for a guest, just send an email to info@beyondclean.net. Thank you for listening to this vendor spotlight on Beyond Clean.